I'm going to briefly present the report's key findings and recommendations. But to begin, a word about why Penn took on this project. As a free expression organization, an important part of our work includes defending the public's right to know. This is also referred to as freedom of information. This is the hallmark and the cornerstone of any open democratic society. An informed public is essential to ensuring government accountability and transparency, and to fostering the sometimes contentious debates a democracy must have about the limits of government power and what is required to ensure national security. We took on the issue of whistleblowers because government workers are our first responders when it comes to detecting government misconduct. They are in the best position to raise an alarm and set in motion the steps necessary to address the problem. We know that broadly, the American public supports whistleblowers and wants to make sure they're protected. In many areas they are, but in others, like the vital US national security sector, we're falling short. Penn has observed a troubling disconnect between what the public believes is true in terms of protections available to whistleblowers and what protections actually exist for workers in the national security area. Many government officials on both sides of the aisle have made remarks about the protections Edward Snowden would have enjoyed if he had pursued more internal channels to raise his concerns. But what they've said doesn't match up to the reality of the laws in place, which leave large gaps in protection for intelligence community workers, particularly for contractors like Snowden. And officials' calls that Snowden should come home to make his case in court are hard to square with the reality of what Snowden would actually be able to say in a courtroom to defend himself from the Espionage Act charges he faces. The report begins by looking at the protections available to intelligence community workers who try to raise concerns internally. There aren't many. If they are retaliated against, they can lodge a complaint with their agency's inspector general, but these offices often lack independence, and they certainly lack power. They can make a recommendation that action be taken to address the retaliation, but they have no enforcement power, so their recommendations may be ignored. In some cases, the inspector general offices have themselves been accused of retaliating against a whistleblower. And under the current framework, whistleblowers can't go to court to challenge retaliatory actions or to appeal the inspector general's determination of their complaint. As a result, there is little deterrence against retaliation. Whistleblowers also aren't protected from retaliatory criminal investigations or prosecution, leaving them most vulnerable to the most serious forms of retaliation. As one of the people interviewed for this report noted, if it's not lawful to fire someone for blowing the whistle, it shouldn't be lawful to put them in jail. Finally, the scant protections that do exist for intelligence community whistleblowers would not help them if the concerns they want to raise have to do with programs that are nominally authorized by law or sanctioned by their agency, as the NSA's mass surveillance programs and the CIA's torture program were. In cases of systemic misconduct, the internal channels provide no protection against retaliation. Some national security workers still feel driven by the demands of their conscience to bring systemic misconduct to light because they believe it is in the public's interest to know about it. They often do this by approaching a journalist and leaking the information. Government leaks to the press happen every day. They are an accepted part of Washington policymaking. But leaks that have been made with the intention of serving the public interest, particularly under President Obama's administration, have been aggressively prosecuted. This administration has charged at least 9 leakers under the Espionage Act, a law intended to target foreign spies that was passed in 1917 at the height of the Red Scare as the United States entered World War I. And this is another major disconnect between what the public understands about these cases and the reality. We hear government officials call for them to make their case in court. In fact, courts have ruled that a defendant's intent in leaking information is irrelevant under the Espionage Act, so defendants can't even attempt to make their case that they disclosed information because they believed the public had a vital need to know about it. Penn's report highlights these disconnects between public perception and reality to show that the gaps in existing protections for intelligence community whistleblowers, coupled with the government's failure to adequately address retaliation against them, and the Obama administration's aggressive prosecution of leakers under the Espionage Act, are damaging to freedom of expression, press freedom, and access to information in the United States. The combined impact of these elements has created a chilling effect on free expression and affects both the willingness of government workers to expose wrongdoing and the ability of journalists to cover their revelations. This poses serious risks for the free flow of information and the informed public debate that is necessary for a healthy democratic society. We close the report with a set of recommendations for the executive and legislative branches. I will highlight 3 of these. First, the government should establish strong, clear protections for all intelligence community workers that apply across agencies and to all categories of workers, including contractors. Second, Congress should reform the Espionage Act to allow defendants to raise a public interest defense in cases of disclosure to the public, and the Justice Department should limit prosecutions under the Act to offenders intending to harm U.S. national defense. Third, the government should implement protections against employment retaliation and criminal prosecution of whistleblowers, including access to courts to challenge retaliation and holding retaliators accountable. And with that, I'll turn to Susan Glasser, Editor-in-Chief of Politico, to introduce our panelists. Thank you very much.